Rachel Brosnahan and Jordan Horowitz. You produced I'm Your Woman, which is about a woman who's forced to go on the run after her criminal husband goes missing. So first off, what inspired this story, and how did you come together to work on it together?
I'll jump in, and then I'll tell the inspiration for it, and then I can pass it off to you, Rachel, to talk about our meeting. So Julia Hart and I, Julia is my wife, and this is our fourth movie together. She directed the movie. In general, she directs, we co-write, and then I produce, often with partners as well. We were, around the time that our kids were born, we were watching a lot of crime thrillers. And in those movies, there are a lot of really wonderful three-dimensional female characters, but very often the film's not centered on those women. And in particular, we were watching Michael Mann's Thief, and at the end of the second act of that movie, Tuesday Weld is kind of forced out of the movie. And Julie kind of turned to me, she was like, what if we just kind of went with that car? And that was the initial spark of the idea. It obviously kind of came a long way from that moment, but we started looking at a lot of those pictures, Straight Time and The Godfather and Thief, and there were a number of pictures that we were really looking at for the archetypal women in those movies and how to tell those stories. So we started to explore that and thought, we were finding some really interesting stuff and kind of telling the story that was happening in parallel to some of the stories that we'd already known cinematically, and finding stuff that was, different, and we hoped fresher, and a bit more modern and a newer perspective on that same story. So we wrote it, and Ken Lee, who is Rachel's wonderful manager, is a very old friend of mine, and I had sent him the script because I sent him stuff sometimes. And he really loved the script, and we were talking about Rachel. He sent it to Rachel, and then Rachel, I can talk to you. You can speak to your response to it. But when it came back to me that she also wanted to produce, my first question was, does she actually want to produce the movie? And now that I know Rachel, I know what a silly question that was, because if there's anyone who actually wants to do the work, it is Rachel. So.
Who has unsolicited opinions.
So we kind of dove into it together, and the rest was movie making. So Rachel, I can let you speak to how it came into your world and what that was.
Yeah, well, as you said, it came across my desk from Ken Lee, who we have in common and both adore, and I had been interested in stepping into producing, but hadn't quite found the right project or the right collaborators. And when I read this script, I was so moved by Jean's story. I had felt starved for scripts that followed women as, women with stories that were as nuanced and three-dimensional, and also that felt honest. This was a story about a woman who comes into her own frame by frame by frame. She doesn't become an overnight badass. Her whole life doesn't change in an instant. And I was so moved by this fresh take on womanhood and motherhood and this genre as a whole. And was so incredibly grateful to Jordan and Julia for making space for me to come on board in this role for the first time. They have such a special working relationship and relationship in general, and I know how vulnerable that must feel. I don't know. I can imagine how vulnerable that must feel to let someone else into that space. And not only did they let me in, but they really gave me the opportunity to find my own voice as a producer, to earn that seat at the table. And it was an incredible experience from top to bottom.
And you're both wearing a couple of different hats in the film. Of course, Jordan, you co-wrote and produced, and Rachel, of course, you star in the film in addition to producing. Now, I can imagine that gives you, you have a greater sense of creative control and influence of where things are going, but also it's obviously a whole different set of responsibilities and challenges. So what was it like kind of juggling those different responsibilities of your different roles on set?
For me, it was the first time juggling these responsibilities and wearing multiple hats. And first and foremost, it gave me a brand new respect for folks who have paved the way long before me, for folks who do this from project to project, like Jordan. I've been wearing so many hats, and Julia writing and directing. It also, now having done it, I don't know how you go backwards. It is, as you said, it gives you a lot more creative control, but it also, as an actor, the thing that was so surprising was how much the time spent in pre-production really enriched both experiences, both hat-wearing experiences, as it were. But it made me a better actor to be able to sit with this role for longer, to have additional context for how Jean's journey unfolded, and to be able to sit in a room every day, even if it was, on the phone, a virtual room, with the writer and the director and one of the producers of the project. It was definitely challenging wanting to be in front of and behind the camera at the same time, to look at it through, with that producerial eye and see if we were getting what we needed and all of those things, and trying to be present in front of the camera. But again, really grateful for the partners on this project who made this space for me to figure out that push-pull.
For me, it's funny. I've talked about this when a similar question's been asked, and I'm not saying this just because it's a producer panel, but like I identify as a producer. I came up as a producer. I know producing, and I came to writing. Like I studied writing and I'd always been kind of dabbling in writing in college, but I never identified as a writer per se. And it took Julia kind of pulling that out of me for me to really say, okay, yeah, I am a writer. We are writing this together. So I definitely tend to leave the writing hat behind once I get into, once we have a draft that we like and we're starting to cast. And like, there's still like writer stuff that I am doing while we're in production, because we're always, when we do read-throughs, when we do rehearsals, we're always rewriting and reshaping stuff. And I tend to, especially because Julie's very busy directing, be the writer that is responsible for like the production writing stuff too. But for whatever reason, I view that as part of my like producerial responsibilities, like being the one to manage like script colors. That feels like a producerial responsibility in many ways. But yeah, I definitely, like, there are times on set when people will ask me creative questions and I'll forget that I co-wrote the script, and I'll answer it like a producer. So I've always been a creative producer. Like that's just the type of producer I am, and I'm involved in all of the, the administrative and business sides of producing, and the packaging and the setting up and the financing and all of the deal making. But I've always been very, very deeply involved in the creative side of things. So it's just, the only difference I find in my producing is that, like, on these movies that I make with Julia, like, I'm actually typing words. So, it in many ways, especially the closer we get to production, I view it as an extension of producing, and not as a separate thing that I have to handle in those moments.
And the film is set in the 1970s, so you've got costumes and set design and all that period detail, music to consider. Like, what kind of challenges and complexities does that bring into kind of a project to kind of establish a sense of time and place?
We always knew we had written this script, like we wrote the first draft like 5 years ago, I think. Yeah, because my son's 6 now, and it was right around when he was born when we first started talking about it. So we always knew, we kind of sat on it for a while, and it wasn't one of those like, we're pushing, we're trying to get it made. We just knew it needed to be of a certain level in terms of having the resources, because we knew we needed to spend on art, and given the set pieces, especially in the back half of the film, we knew we needed to spend on time, and also given the baby, time was really a thing that we needed to have. Like, it wasn't a movie that we could or wanted to make on a 23-day schedule, so knowing that there were 2 big pockets where we needed to spend in a very real way, we just kind of sat on it until Julia, as a filmmaker, we felt like she was somebody who could demand those types of resources to make a picture like this. So patience was a big piece of it, and also then just waiting to have till we kind of had like an idea of who we wanted to cast in it. And Rachel was, I think, the first person we went to. So it was very it was very much about like patience and knowing the scope and ambition of the film, and not trying to rush it to do just to make the movie, because we've done things like that and learned from those mistakes. There are movies that we made that like, oh, we have an opportunity to make it, so we're just going to push it through. And as a producer, I definitely used to do that when I was younger. That's always like the piece of advice I give to younger producers. It's just like, wait until you have the opportunity to make the movie you want to make, just not when you have the opportunity to make a movie. Make the version of the movie that you set out to make, and be confident that you can get that version made. And write to the number that you think you're going to be able. Write to a number that you think you can accomplish. You know, unless you're writing a spec script and it's a studio thing, and that's a totally different world. But if you're talking about actually like making things, patience is really key in understanding what kind of resources you need to bring to it. So that was a big piece of it for us.
Well, and coming in at the stage in the process that I did as well, when you guys had been sitting with this script for so long, I will say, as a new producer, that was one of the very first lessons that Jordan taught me, was that we collectively as a team, you know, went into this uncompromising on that front. And you were exactly right. It was worth the wait.
Yeah. It's like, I've made enough movies now that like, I know what a thing should cost. And I pride myself on not being overreaching in terms of what budget it should be. I'm just sort of saying, this is the movie that we want to make. This is what it's going to cost to make the thing on the page. Because very often what I see happen on other projects, and certainly on projects I've worked on when I was younger, is that there's a thing on the page, and then you wind up, just because you have an opportunity to make it in some capacity, you wind up charging forward. And then eventually there's the question of like, well, but it's not the thing that was on the page. And it's like, well, yeah, we couldn't do that because we didn't have the resources to do it. And it's like, well, we signed up to make the thing on the page. And then you're like, well, but you didn't want to spend X amount, you only wanted to spend Y. And then it's like, well, why didn't you say it then? And there's like these conversations where people tend to talk past each other, especially in early stages, in order to just get into production and get a thing made. And then you wind up having to talk about why it's not the thing that they thought it was, that you thought you were making. And like, people aren't on the same page about what you're actually making. And so, when Rachel, I think what we talked about this so much when you first came in, it's what I always talk to partners and people who come in early into projects, is like, get on the same page in terms of what it is that you're doing. What movie are you making? And that has multiple answers. It can be anything you want. I think you can really make any movie for any number, but you just all need to be on the same page in terms of what movie you're making. And then that's what you hold true to and present that and feel confident in what movie you're making and why that has value. And then you kind of move forward and you find the people that want to buy into the thing you're making, not buy into the thing that they think you're making.
Well, I want to congratulate you both on I'm Your Woman, and thank you so much for talking to me about it. And we will bring you back for our group chat a little later.